So we start with the idea that what we're doing as practitioners is releasing conceptuality. We're releasing conceptuality, which is summarized by Daat, to be subsumed into keter, where that release that I very often refer to as a sacrificial release, because it's consumed like the animal flesh that was burned in the fires of the temple offering pits, where the smoke went up into the air and dissolved literally into the ethers. What a metaphor, because if you view all your resistances, everything that holds you back from realization, as being consumed in this process of fiery offering, you have life force, dissolving networks of klipot for the purpose of making that which is opaque, existentially opaque or reified, existentially transparent. So you have the first step, which is our main aspiration, to surrender all the conceptuality that is Daat-based, to be subsumed by the increasing transparency of keter. In other words, the practitioner of this type, the practitioner of mystical contemplation, is not consumed with lesser concerns, is not consumed with small things. Asking Pazuzu to help me with my bank account, or some minor worldly benefit that I'm seeking the spirits to acquire. No, we're only concerned with realizing phenomena at the root, which in a sense takes it completely out of the auspices of what a great many occultists are concerned with in their magical endeavors, which are almost entirely worldly for a great many of them, that we're concerned with the root. So if conceptuality, either in part or in full, but full is a lot to ask, walking on water was not built in a day, so to speak. So incrementally, conceptuality is transmuted into transparency when the sacrifice is made clear, and keter can have instances of transparency that are extremely brief, that overtake the mind, and I refer to these as sparks that are raised. For the duration of that spark, which is uncatchable, there could be an instance of transparency. I also refer to these instances as a lightning flash, because for most people, this quality of its speed is particularly noteworthy, because immediately after the spark of realization collapses the house of cards produced by conceptuality and transparency is glimpsed, what usually happens after that? The person conceptualizes about it. So after the lightning flash happens, the first thought of the mind is, wow, I just had the lightning flash. And then it's over. The joke's on us, because the habit of conceptuality requires a hell of a lot of breakthroughs before the root habit actually changes. So we have to see this coming, that it comes in sparks, it comes in flashes, and we learn from those flashes what transparency really is. Good thing we have devices like the 9 chambers to tell us what its qualities are. Otherwise, we wouldn't know what hit us. So the second point I have listed here is transparency, which is known through keter, but it's not attributed to keter. It's attributed to the ground itself. When keter becomes transparent, it's possible that realization can be accomplished. And this reveals the sublime wisdom qualities of the 9 chambers. So in full or in part, in a corrupted form or glimpsed in its pure form, in the rare occasion that such a thing would be possible, Daat is subsumed by keter. That's the second point. The third point in our little review here is that the 9 chambers that occupy keter, if it is rendered transparent, pour out as Tiferet. And this means that the configuration of Sefirot that were operable during this surrender of Daat and the burgeoning transparency of keter have raised the middle pillar 1 notch, as I've said many, many times, and Tiferet abides in the place where Daat used to be. And I have a whole analysis of this in one of my courses. I think it was the esoteric cartography course, although I can't be sure, where I label this position of the raised Tiferet, and I call it the chamber of exchanges. Because for several reasons. First of all, the exchange of Tiferet for Daat is what marks this outpouring, which is markedly different from what the mind usually does in its conventional state. That's the primary reason. A secondary reason is that when sparks are raised as a lightning flash and breakthroughs are actually accomplished, albeit brief as they may be, the instances of profound outpouring from Tiferet, because there's no buffer at that point between the supernal essentiality and Tiferet, whose job is purely expression. Tiferet literally means beauty, so we're really talking about the expression of what Socrates and thereby Plato and the Neoplatonists called the true, the good, and the beautiful. We're not talking about something that's good because you like it or beautiful because it's not ugly. We're talking about essential beauty, the splendor of the primordial beauty. And this outpouring of Tiferet leaves a mark on a practitioner. It changes them. It actually transmutes them in subtle ways. And some of those transmutations, even if the practitioner reverts back to their habits, some of these changes are permanent and they accumulate. And it's possible that imprints are made in this chamber of exchanges. And what happens for many practitioners is they can draw from those imprints and form impressions of them for various purposes. I myself, as an esoteric cartographer, use those imprints and the impressions drawn from them as the basis for esoteric cartography. It's the basis for my mapping, because you can't really ever map out an impression of something like that. It's always an approximation. But even as an approximation, there has to be something there that is not in the realm of fantasy. There has to be a reality that can be drawn from and engaged. And that's the imprint. An impression draws it into what would be the conceptualizing psyche, but if the psyche is subsumed as an offering, it's really an aspect of consciousness that is extremely subtle. And that becomes the basis of this approximation process. But that's another subject. The main thing is that for a practitioner, the outpouring of the lightning flash in Tiferet produces a chamber of exchanges that provides the basis of what we call in this course the aspeklaria, the window or mirror within the heart of the mind, within the heart of awareness itself, to express primordial qualities. And if you look at the diagram here, you will see that right in the center of this diagram are the 9 chambers. That essentially the 9 chambers are realized in the heart, through the heart's effulgence, as we've said many times. But another interesting and unusual thing about this diagram is that it's composed of 2 circles. One circle is coming down from keter and overlapping the second circle at the sphirot of Tiferet, Chesed, Gevura, and Yesod. The second circle is coming up from below and overlapping the first circle, bounded by the sphirot of Yesod, Gevura, Chesed, and Tiferet. So you have this intermediate zone where the crystallization takes place, where an exchange takes place that we said last week is bounded by the lungs and etheric activity that is breathed through in a kind of cyclical process. And we delineated that with the organ system. But what's really important here to understand is what a human being can do, what only a human being can do, that my pencil can't do, and my cat can't do, and not all other human beings can do. And this special quality that makes human beings uniquely qualified for gnosis or realization is the idea that into this lightning flash presentation of outpouring, I can subsume the mind's eye, the mind's capacity to perceive, which is evident in visualization, is evident in all forms of perception, and I can subsume the locus of that activity, which is seated in Yesod, into Tiferet, and that creates this heart-full space that I refer to as the cardia plenum. So what happens here when the cardia plenum starts to bear forth sublime wisdom qualities is that the mind's eye is being raised into something that has already descended to meet it. Now, this can be really misunderstood, and this gets into a really hazy area, because the question will inevitably ask, which comes first? Does the raising come first, or does the subsuming into that which is pouring out come first? Well, this is a question that can't be answered, because what we're talking about here is a conjunction of Kabbalistic qualities. The dynamic of the crystallization of these 2 vectoral directions, raising up and pouring down, overlapping with each other. These can't be reduced to a mechanical process. These can't be linearized in time and place, or even by ideas. These can't be dumbed down to causal relationships, although it certainly seems from this description that there are causes and effects going on. They are only, like I said, approximations, symbols of something which is acausal. It seems that I'm describing it in a way to convey to you what's going on, and you could conceptualize it. But what is actually being communicated here, if you get my hints, is something that is non-conceptual. So it is acausal. It is non-conceptual, even though the symbolic language that I'm using to convey it to you seems to be causal and conceptual and would be misunderstood in that way by those who fail to grasp the nature of what symbols are actually doing. They are alluding to realities beyond language, beyond graphic representation, beyond concepts and ideas. which are reified structures. So this point number 4, where your Yesod, the mind's eye, which is the seat of the imagination, and that's where all our interior life hovers, for better or for worse, meaning Yesod in the mind's eye can generate fantasies that can envelop the mind's eye within itself, producing scenarios that are endless, and you could get sucked into fantasy land and never escape. So the real question for practitioners via the mind's eye and via fantasy is how much of what you're doing actually checks out, has this quality of degeneration into fantasy destroyed your work, ruined your work. In other words, have you created fantasy scenarios and ended up believing in them? I'm not pointing any fingers, but how many occultists with their encounters of the holy guardian angel, and how many people locking themselves in a little house performing the Abramelin operation, or invocations of spirits from grimoires, or animal-headed Egyptian deities, or what have you, fill in the blank here. How many of them are basically just making it up and believing in their fantasies that they themselves have produced in the mind's eye and invested with the qualities of adherence and conviction and belief for psychological reasons? I'm not saying all of them. I'm not saying none of them, but I'm certainly saying some of them. Not my place to sort out other people's practice experiences. But what is my place is the ability to point out that something else can be done with the mind's eye other than fantasize. That raw power to create a visualization, which is inherent in perception itself if it is noticed. If you notice the role of the mind's eye in even sensory perception, you see that sensory perception is not the mechanical, automatic, animal-level activity that some people would think it is. A true nihilistic materialist would say that perception is merely a set of neurological connections, that is a brain activity, that is a combination of electrochemical impulses, the sense organs themselves providing impulses or pure data, and that the cognition, the perception itself that is produced from it, is merely a very, very sophisticated brain-based activity that registers data. If you reduce perception to data in this way, zero level of the magic remains, and it becomes simply a very, very complex machine. If the magic of what Yesod provides with the mind's eye is noticed as full of life force, and the question of life force is even made mechanical by people who reduce the process to causal relationships. But if the sparks of life force in the capacity of consciousness to create anything and anything in reality, if this is subsumed into the outpouring of Tiferet, if we can notice this quality of the mind's eye and surrender that along with conceptuality, the outpouring of Tiferet, based on our capacity to have done that surrender of conceptuality. And like I said, I don't think that you could reduce this to a mechanical timeline of which comes first or which comes later. Is the outpouring of Tiferet always happening? Well, maybe, if you become aware of it. Is the process of sacrifice of the conceptual barriers of klipot always possible? Well, yes, it can be if you become aware of it. So if you understand the dynamics of surrender doing something with the mind's eye and the outpouring coming down to meet it from the supernal essentiality itself, you have in your possession a set of symbolic dynamics that portray a conjunction which is literally outside of time. That in the moment that the lightning flash is apprehended with the full potency of the mind's eye enveloped within it, there is no more self, there is no more other, there are no more places, there are no more individual moments in time, and there are certainly no ideas dividing it up into pieces. When this fullness, which is inherently open, is suffused with the hot blood of that which it takes to notice it, which is always devotion, which is always love of the sublime, this becomes the heartful space of the cardioplenum that is inherent without boundary. And this is what crystallizes as the spontaneity of appearance is expressed as the 9 primordial chambers. So what you see in this tree diagram on the screen here, where the 2 circles are overlapping and converging into the 9 qualities, is the meeting of rising up and pouring down as the basis of this crystallization. And it states it in very clean and clear terms. So those of you who are really paying attention, who will get the symbolic gold star as good little kiddies in the classroom today, might notice that these dynamics that I'm talking about have a strange familiarity to them. Maybe you've heard it in some other context before. Well, I'm going to read you a little passage here that will allude to what I'm talking about, and we'll draw some conclusions for that. After the various functions of the field of display have been portrayed, it culminates with this great event that is described in the book of Genesis. A mist rose up from the earth and watered the entire surface of the soil. And the divine, Adonai Elohim, then formed Adam, human consciousness, from the dust of the ground. And he blew into his nostrils the breath of life. So let's put some Hebrew into here. The mist rose up from the earth and it watered the entire surface of the soil. The word for soil here is Adamah. Aleph, Dalet, Mem, Hey. Aleph, Dalet, Mem, Hey. Well, Aleph, Dalet, Mem is the name of Adam. Is the name of the being that's being created here, with a hey on the end. We've spoken about what hey means. It's the window of vision, the capacity for everything that I've mentioned today to be realized through this window. It's the place where these 2 circles in this diagram converged. So the earth itself, the ground of the earth, is literally the ground of primordial phenomena that I've been speaking of. It's the ground that presents the 9 chambers. It's complete and whole. It lacks nothing. So this goes back to the distinction I was making before between a human being and my pencil, that a human being can realize its own nature, its own ungraspable nature, and the pencil cannot. There is a 100% pure, all pervading suffusion of the divine throughout all phenomena. But not all expressions of phenomena have the capacity to realize the primordiality of their own nature. A human being does. A human being is a point of expression that can realize the nature of the ground that is being expressed by its own existence, if you want to use such a term, such a dualistic term. So the mist rose up from the earth and watered the entire, in other words, pervaded the entire surface of the Adamah with its own nature. It's complete and whole and ready to be realized. So what happens is that it rises up like the mist, which is an etheric gesture, a fog, an atmosphere rises up from below, and the divine blows the Ruach Elohim, which is direct reference to etheric phenomena. The word Ruach is explicitly stated, into it, and the conjunction of both of these dynamics forms the overlap that defines what a human being is. This is Adam, the ability to utilize the window provided, the hay provided by the Adamah. Adam is realizing himself. Adam with a hay on the end, Adamah. Adam is inherently this, but not so fast, because being an expression of primordiality and realizing it are two very, very different things. Because klipos intervene and take the mind on a little side trip into a conjunction with surfaces and a dislocation of focus, etc., etc. So as the Ruach Elohim is blown into the Adamah and the two are conjoined and Adam is created, the name Adam summarizes the potency that is unleashed here. Dalet Mem, Dam, means blood. The Aleph is the symbol of wholeness itself, primordial wholeness itself, complete and whole, the primordial ground of Ein Sof. So obviously the potency of these two things is that the realization of the primordial ground is inherent in the blood, in the living tissues of that blood, in the thickening of its perceptions. And this is literally what becomes possible through the auspices of these potencies being unleashed onto themselves, should they be utilized properly. If they're not utilized properly, they'll just simply do something else. They'll live superficially, they'll get distracted, sidetracked, and so on and so forth. But if the promise of Adam, having the Ruach Elohim blown into literally the soil of the ground, if that is borne out in the way that is being described by these 5 precepts here, what is realized in the heart of this incredibly, profoundly powerful juncture is what the 9 chambers promise and what can be realized about them. And this is what can crystallize as the aspeklaria in the heart and be known throughout all things as the cardia plenum. So by restating all this and these major dynamics and reading that Genesis passage, what's being stated here is very interesting, because it states that human beings, by nature of their humanity, have this potential latent within them. It doesn't mean at all that anything will ever be done about it. What can be done about it, that can crystallize the aspeklaria and realize the latent potential that is on the most profound level inherent in the human heart, that's what a practitioner does. So having it latent and possible just because you're a human being is a nice start, but it doesn't amount to anything if you don't actually make use of it. And the making use of it is a direct mirroring of the set of principles that formed you in the first place. Because if what formed your latent potential in the first place is this rising up and pouring down, conjoining into an overlap, that's what we're replicating with what is being described here. We are replicating the creation of our own being in every moment, mirroring it by our quest for gnosis. So the quest for gnosis becomes literally a recreation of what you already are. Holy crap! That should be the most exciting thing you ever heard. Think about this, please.